The mazurka is one of those dance forms known very well by pianists due to the numerous mazurkas Chopin wrote. However, due to its relative absence from the repertoire of other instruments besides its inclusion now and then in the orchestral music of 19th century ballet, it is not a form often discussed. The mazurka originated in the Mazovia region of Poland, which is a historical region of Poland that surrounds and includes the capital city of Warsaw. The inhabitants of Mazovia were historically referred to as Mazurs or Mazurians, which is where the Mazur in Mazurka comes from. And while in Polish the dance is called the Mazurek, which roughly translates to Dance of the Mazurs, it changes to Mazurka in its accusative and genitive form in Polish. The ka was later interpreted in the Russian language as a feminine affix. Because of this, most languages that gender their nouns outside of Polish have given the word a feminine article, while in Polish it remains in the masculine. Before we get into the musical traits of the mazurka, I would like to briefly touch on some of the characteristics of the dance, as I think these are important for the interpreter or composer to take into account. One of the most characteristic steps of the dance is called the pas glissé, which is executed by springing lightly on one foot and allowing the left foot to glide forward, employing the 3 beats of the bar. These steps alternate from one leg to the other, enabling the basic step of the dance to continue as needed. Because of the incessant use of the pas glissé in the mazurka, it is often just simply referred to as the mazurka step or pas mazurka. I once read a good comparison that the step resembles ice skating, which is a good way to look at it. Another characteristic is that dancers often stamp their feet, sometimes in this rhythm, which shows up in the melodies of mazurkas. Although there are many steps common to the mazurkas, such as the pas de basque or pas boiteau, many of these are just additional flourishes to perform in between the pas glissé. If you were to write or perform a mazurka, I think it's a good idea to at least imagine this step in order to understand the feeling of a mazurka, especially the gliding, ice skating-like feeling this step creates. There's a levity and lightness to it. So what defines a mazurka besides a gliding or stamping-like characteristic? Like the waltz, the mazurka is in 3/4 time. However, this comparison should be used sparingly, as many composers who wrote mazurkas outside of Poland often relied on a waltz-like accompaniment to a mazurka melody. So how does one write or understand a mazurka without assuming it's some distant relative of the waltz? First is the rhythm of a mazurka. Mazurkas heavily accent the 2nd or 3rd beat of the measure, whereas other European dances in 3/4 time, such as the waltz or minuet, accent the 1st beat. The origin of the displaced accent in the mazurka is generally explained by the paroxytonic accent in the Polish language, whereby words are generally accented on the 2nd to last syllable. English examples of this phenomenon are found in words like potato or music. However, accenting the 2nd to last syllable is so commonplace in the Polish language that it isn't a stretch to imagine their folk music reflecting this in some fashion. So what is the tempo of a mazurka? This is where some debate begins to appear, as a traditional mazurka can be defined as somewhere between allegretto and allegro in tempo, so somewhat faster than moderato, but not quite a full-blown allegro. Even if a mazurka were to be in allegro, which isn't necessarily forbidden, it is usually indicated as being allegro non troppo, but most definitely not presto. Oftentimes, scores to mazurkas come only with the indication tempo di mazurka, so it's important to know as a performer the correct speed with which to play a mazurka. Surprisingly, the debate as to the correct tempo of a mazurka arises from Chopin's very own mazurkas, a composer who undoubtedly popularized the mazurka outside of its popularity as merely a ballroom dance. Some of Chopin's mazurkas are written with tempo indications far outside the accepted norm for the traditional mazurka, such as Opus 17, No. 2, indicated as lento ma non troppo, or Opus 6, No. 4, with the tempo indication of presto ma non troppo. So what is going on here? Well, besides the mazurka, there are 2 other fairly popular Polish dances in 3/4 time, with which Chopin would have been familiar. One being the kujawiak, and the other being the oberek. While both dances share the displaced accents with the mazurka, they differ in tempo and choreography. To put things in simple terms, the kujawiak is somewhat slow and dignified, while the oberek is wild and quick. Compare this to what I'd define as a lively but restrained tempo for the mazurka. It appears Chopin combined aspects of the slow kujawiak and quick oberek into his concert mazurkas. In the Polish composer Felix Starczewski's writings on Polish dances, he, for this very reason, does not consider every mazurka of Chopin's to be a true mazurka. But this mainly comes from his folk music purist standpoint relating to the intricacies of the choreography, tempi, and formal subdivisions, which begin to blur anyways in pieces that are meant purely for a concert setting and not meant to be danced to. The next aspect to discuss are the rhythmic aspects found in these fundamental mazurka rhythms, the most ubiquitous being the dotted eighth followed by a 16th note. This corresponds to the rhythm often stamped out by dancers in the choreography of the mazurka. Another aspect found in more authentically Polish mazurkas is the application of drones, or the bourdon bass. This, as with many folk music-derived music forms, is meant to mimic the drone tones of a bagpipe, as mazurkas were often performed in a rural setting with bagpipes. Many of Chopin's mazurkas, such as Opus 68 No. 3, employ this technique. Another aspect one should not ignore when writing mazurkas is that modes such as Phrygian, Aeolian, and Lydian can be employed to further strengthen the folk music characteristic of the music, which is something Chopin often did. Take Opus 41 No. 1, with its wonderful use of C-sharp Phrygian at the beginning of the piece. This is denoted by the use of D natural instead of D sharp, as the hallmark of the Phrygian scale is its half step at the beginning of the scale. Besides all these characteristics, one cannot neglect to mention in a video on form how one were to go about structuring a mazurka when writing one. The mazurka does not have a standard structural form as say a minuet or allemande does, but some guidelines can, however, be followed. First is to realize passages of mazurkas are generally divided into 16 or 32 bar phrases. This is, however, not set in stone, as mazurkas can also be subdivided into mathematical groups of 8 bars. So besides 16 and 32 bars, you can also commonly have 8 and 24 bar phrases. But generally, I'd stick to 16 or 32 bar phrases. This can be done either with 16 or 32 bar phrases of unique music or by repeating 8 or 16 bar phrases. These phrases can be lined up in chains with a recapitulation of the A phrase or theme at the end of the chain or not. A mazurka can also appear in binary form, like many dances, so an A theme followed by a B theme in a related key that ends back in the tonic. The last is the typical ternary form, whereby the binary form simply opts to add a da capo to repeat the A theme, or a ternary form with a slightly altered recapitulation of the A theme. I would, however, say that the mazurka's form is determined more by its 8, 16, or 32 bar phrases than its structural form. So thus, it's possible, in theory, to graft enough of the determining factors of a mazurka into a sonata or even rondo form, and still have something passable as a mazurka. The mazurka is long past being a popular or common ballroom dance, or even a popular form in composition, and is more or less back to being danced or performed in a traditional folk context in Poland. However, its unique rhythmic and melodic traits make it an interesting musical style and form to work with, or at the very least understand as a composer. And I hope by laying out some of the determinative traits of the mazurka that musicians who watch this video also get a better understanding of what a mazurka is. Essentially, outside of Poland, the mazurka became a mix of many of the aspects of three-quarter Polish folk music. But only through reading and listening to many mazurkas, including and besides those written by Chopin, and studying the related dances of the kujawiak and oberek, can one develop a more nuanced understanding of the concert mazurka as Chopin understood it. I'd say the concert mazurka should be understood more as a musical postcard of all the three-quarter time folk music from Poland. So ultimately, it's something the Poles will always understand best. But this video, as always, is meant merely as an introduction, and I hope it has sparked your interest in this unique musical form. And as always, I look forward to discussing more musical forms in the future, so stay tuned.